field and the fowls of heaven hath he given into your hand, and hath made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. So this great statue's head began prophecy from Daniel's day down to ours, to the return of Jesus Christ. Nebuchadnezzar was the very first king who was a part of this golden statue. Then he mentions another kingdom that would rise, that it would be inferior, not as strong, not as powerful, but it would also bear rule over the whole world. This was the Medo-Persian Empire that ruled. And then in verse 39, he tells of yet another that is going to rule, a third. And so this was the Macedonian Empire under Alexander the Great. He conquered more quickly than any other king had ever done the known world at that time around the Mediterranean. He sat down and died from diseases and a broken heart because he had no more lands to conquer. But then in verse 40, he said, "And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron." And so a fourth kingdom did rise, starting in 31 BC and ran right on down to 476 AD. And that fourth kingdom was the Roman Empire. At that particular time, it was a physical government. It was not yet the Holy Roman Empire. But this Roman Empire finally collapsed in 476 AD. And when it collapsed, it left an indelible print upon the European community and the continent. It left exactly 10 nations there that came out of that collapsed Roman Empire. They were Italy, Austria, Switzerland, France, Germany, England, Holland, Belgium, Spain, and Portugal. There were 10 of them. And Machiavelli actually wrote about this, even though he knew nothing about Bible prophecy. He knew nothing about the collapse of the Roman Empire, that it was even prophesied in the pages of the Bible. Rome was revived, however. The Bishop of Rome was given total and absolute authority over all the churches. This was in 538 AD. And then he crowned Justinian in 554 AD for the imperial restoration of the Holy Roman Empire. And then the Roman Empire was broken down into two segments, the East and the West. East was Constantinople, its capital, and it had great libraries in which to this very day there's documents dating all the way back to the Roman Empire, what was happening in the religious community in Judea and the world. And then the Roman Empire was the western capital of Rome. So the legs represented a breaking into two parts. Then it came right on down till there were 10 toes. But the Holy Roman Empire, which was Satan's tool to stamp out truth out of the earth, was to rule for 1,260 consecutive years. It was a religious organization combined with a political. The religious would hand down dictates as to what everyone was to believe. And then the empire sent the military to enforce the dictates. That's why in the book of Daniel, chapter 7, it talked about a different type. When this fourth empire would rise, it would be diverse. And it was. The Roman Empire became a Holy Roman Empire, a combination of church and state. But what happened to the Christians at that time? We know that they were scattered. They left Jerusalem in the Middle East. They went all over the world. Most of them went to the British Isles. Many of them did. History bears it out. We prove it in our 500-page book, The History of God's Church in the Coming New World Order. But in Revelation chapter 12, it tells about this 1,260 years in which the church would flee outside the circumference of the Holy Roman Empire. It would receive protection from God Almighty. In verse 1, it says, "There appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars." So there were 12 tribes of Israel. She, being with child, cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered. So the Messiah was to be born through her. Then she was to be scattered all over the world. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon. Verse 9 of the same chapter identifies the great red dragon as none other than Satan, the devil. And he had 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his head. So there were 7 different world governments, starting all the way back with Nimrod right after the flood, that would culminate with the end of the age, all the way through Rome. And all of them were pagan, Gentile world governments. But the very last one would be different because it would have 10 toes, and it would be the one that would fight Jesus Christ. But notice what happened before that time. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven. In Revelation 1 verse 20, it shows that a star can be an angel. So Satan drew 1/3 of the angels to follow him. How long it took him to talk them into rebelling against God, none of us know. We just know that it happened. And did cast them to the earth, and the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. So Jesus was born. Satan was there with his military. They were wanting to kill Jesus because they were fearful he would take over the crown, take over world government from the Roman Empire. Then verse 5, and she brought forth a man-child. We know his name was Jesus because he would save the people from their sins, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. So he's our high priest today, atoning for the sins of those that have been called. And then in verse 6, and the woman fled into the wilderness. And upon the day of Pentecost, when God's Spirit came to the church, and for the first time, anyone who believed the message, when God called them, they would be the true Israel of God, while the others were physical racial Israelites, the ones that God would deal with outside of physical racial nations. He would deal with them to become kings and priests to rule with Jesus Christ. They would be judges during the 1,000-year reign of Jesus. These are the ones he began to deal with. So they fled where she has a place prepared of God that they should feed her 1,260 days. In the book of Numbers, chapter 14, verse 34, it shows that for every day that the spies went in and searched the land, because they brought a bad report, 10 of the 12, then God punished Israel. They would wander in the wilderness 40 years, a day for a year, until all those under the age of 20 died, and only the children would go in and inherit the land. So it is the principle of 1,260 days equal a year for each day, 1,260 years. Something happened, however, during this period of time on May 1st, 1776, that helped prepare for the collapse of the last revival of this Holy Roman Empire. A man by the name of Adam Weishaupt, who was a Jesuit priest at Ingolstadt University, he taught canon law, but he hated God, and he became a worshiper of Satan. He started an ultra-secret organization called the Order of the Illuminati. It heads up all secret orders all over the world, no matter what it is. The Rosicrucians. It is over Freemasonry at the highest level. Their object was to overthrow all religion and all monarchs from one end of the world to the other. So there would be no one that would be able to stand against them. The Illuminati merged with the very highest level of Freemasonry in 1782 at the Congress of Wilhelmsbad in Germany. There was a man by the name of Comte de Verreaux. He was from France. He went to this Congress of Wilhelmsbad. He would ask when he came back what he had learned and what was revealed at this particular meeting. He said that he would never reveal the secrets, but he said that there was a conspiracy against the church, meaning the Catholic Church, and against the monarchy. And all those nations had individual monarchs. And that there was a conspiracy that was woven so well, it was so well thought out, that the church, meaning the Catholic Church and the monarchy, could not escape from it. They would be destroyed. And from that day forward, this particular gentleman, the Comte de Vero, spoke of Freemasonry only with horror, because he knew what had been declared and what had been decided. He knew that there was coming a problem of which no nation on earth would be able to get out from under the grips of it. The Illuminati sponsored the French Revolution. It was known as the Reign of Terror. It was short-lived, however. They weren't prepared, probably due to secret infiltration by agents of the Illuminati. Napoleon sent General Berthier and captured the Pope in 1798. Why is this important? Because in 538 AD, the Bishop of Rome was given all power over all the churches. And then in 1798, after he became the Pope in 610 AD, his official title, 1,260 years later, he died in a prison in France. And then the Pope died in France, and that ended what we call the Holy Roman Empire. Also, probably through secret influence into the French government, which the Reign of Terror was fomented against, armies were raised and fought and defeated Napoleon in 1814 at the Battle of Waterloo. And so when you look from the very time when the Bishop of Rome crowned Justinian in 554 AD for the revival of the Holy Roman Empire, and you add 1,260 years to it, you come to exactly 1814. So the Bible was correct. 1,260 years, the church would be outside the influence of the Holy Roman Empire. It would destroy all knowledge, practically, of the Bible. Everything. It would change everything that is found in the pages of the Bible from the truth to a lie, to deceive the whole world. Meanwhile, about this time, the United States of America had won its independence and declared so July 4th, 1776. The Constitution was accepted in September of 1787 because the time of the Illuminati was coming along right about the same time as the American Revolution. The Illuminati had no effect on its beginning and on the revolution itself. However, it wasn't long until they began to show themselves in America. Before ratification of the Constitution of the United States, a great patriot, Patrick Henry, who said, "Give me liberty or give me death," entered into the discussions and forced the unalienable rights, called the Bill of Rights, to be added to the Constitution. The word unalienable means non-changeable. You cannot change them, supposedly, if the people were guarding their freedoms. And so the Constitution was to be our safeguard so that no one would ever take our freedoms from us. And in the Constitution and also in the Bill of Rights, it discusses that Congress only should coin money and regulate the value of it. It was very important because of their history on the European continent before coming and settling America. A man by the name of Mayer Rothschild, Mayer Amschel Rothschild, who had a red flag as his shield. He was an international banker. He had 5 sons. He sent them to capitals of countries in Europe, France, Germany, Austria, and so on. They took over what was called central banking houses and began to issue the currency of each nation. When they did this, the nation would have to pay back the money at interest, so they would subjugate the nation. It would come under the control of the bankers. And if the bankers didn't like the way the government was treating them, they would withhold money. And so since there was no supply of money, there would be a depression. The people would go hungry. And then a second part that was guaranteed to every American was the Second Amendment to the Constitution. Every person was guaranteed to be able to have guns, just in case. That is, just in case that there would be tyranny that would come into the United States and try to usurp the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. This began to happen eventually. The order of the revolution, or the order of the Illuminati, started with the American Revolution, was already underway. It was nearly over with. Therefore, it played no significant part. However, before the colonies began to unite, the Constitution was even adopted fully, and the Republic was established. There were 15 lodges of the Order of the Illuminati that was formed in the original 13 colonies. The Columbian Lodge of the Order of the Illuminati was established in New York City, from which they worked through all the other lodges. This was in 1785. Members included Governor DeWitt Clinton of New York, later Clinton Roosevelt, who happened to be a direct descendant, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, of his, Charles Dana, and Horace Greeley. The following year, in 1786, a lodge was established in Virginia. Thomas Jefferson was identified with that lodge. When Adam Weishaupt's diabolical plans were exposed by the Bavarian government in Germany, Jefferson strongly defended him as only an enthusiastic philanthropist. However, people in America knew better. President of Harvard University, David Papin, spoke out against it and told of its diabolical tenets to the graduating class in 1798. Also, President Timothy Dwight of Yale University gave a similar warning concerning the Illuminati. Also in 1798, George Washington sent a letter to a G.W. Snyder in which he told that they had diabolical tenets, and that while he didn't believe every lodge of the Illuminati or every lodge of Freemasonry had any diabolical plot, there were individuals within the lodges who did. So there were warnings that the Illuminati was now on American shores. The Illuminati jumped continents, and it began in the United States of America. And so it was. In 1829, an American Illuminati member sponsored a series of lectures. This was by an English Illuminati member, Francis Wright. Francis Wright advocated the entire Adam Weishaupt program. This included communism for the first time, the word communism. They said communism would become the thing of the future when they gained a stronghold. They would overthrow a nation so that it would be the seen enemy of the Western world of Christianity. It would be used as a tool of destruction for the nation so they could rebuild their governments from the bottom up. Part of their platform was, listen carefully, you will recognize it, it's everywhere today in America. Equal opportunity and equal rights. We hear it everywhere. This is part of the Illuminati's platform to undermine America. Then they were to introduce atheism into the schools of America. They were to have the emancipation of women, free them from the home, force them into the workplace so that no one would bring their children up properly with a godly background. They would be turned over to the public schools where God would be prohibited from entering into the classrooms. Then they espoused free love, free sex among the opposites, no matter who it was, whether you were married or single, it did not matter. Those present were informed that the Illuminati intended to unite the nihilist, the atheist, groups along with all other subversive organizations into the new international organization known as communism. This would be the new destructive force that was used by the Illuminati to foment wars of liberation in the future. They would use it for revolutions in nations all over the world to prepare it for a one-world government. As Adam Weishaupt called it, the Novus Ordo Seclorum. It's on the back of every single $1 bill that you have. Their goal and their purpose of the Federal Reserve System, and those who own it, 8 international banking firms, are all a part of the Illuminati. There were certain people who were selected in America to raise money. One of them was Clinton Roosevelt. Former President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a direct ancestor. Franklin Roosevelt was also a 32nd degree Mason. He brought socialism into America. Charles Dana and Horace Greeley were appointed as the committee to raise the funds for this new undertaking in the New World. And the New World was to be the place. They would use their riches to send international communism around the world. Illuminati agents were sent into every single state in the South as time progressed and more states came into the Union. A little later on, it became known as the Confederacy. Certain states believed that Massachusetts in particular and other northern states were violating the Constitution, which was a contract, an agreement with every single state. You see, every state in America was an individual nation. They only sent representatives to a 10 square mile area called Washington, D.C., for the purpose of defending the borders of North America and a few other restricted items that they were to do. But the Illuminati, in order to carry out their diabolical plans and programs, always create a problem. Then they advertise that problem very widely. Then thirdly, they furnish the solution to the problem so that it'll bring all the nations or whatever they're trying to work on closer to their program. So they created something that was already, since the Constitution was adopted, was being worked on in both the North and the South. Since our Constitution said that all men were created equal, little by little, the states and individuals within those states were training and teaching those that they had purchased as slaves to be free. 3% of the Northerners had not achieved that yet. Between 5 and 6% of the Southerners, mainly the cotton plantations, which supplied the North and Washington, D.C. with most of its money to run the government. And so who would create a war over 3 to 5% of the population and using slavery as the excuse? Nobody would. And yet they established their own newspapers, both in the North and in the South. In the North, they were building up the slavery as a problem. In the South, they were stating that the federal government was overstepping its bounds. So the flames of secession began to grow in the South, and every single state in the South had been infiltrated by the Illuminati agents, and they were the ones, and we named them in our 500-page book, every one of them. They were the ones who had suggested leaving the Union, and they did. And so the real problem was states' rights, infringement upon the rights of individual nations by an all-powerful federal government. That's the same problem that we have in America today. The states are bypassed. We, the people, are the ultimate power. we have been bypassed. And there is nothing left but a centralized federal government in Washington, D.C. So they created the problem, slavery. They advertised it widely, the evil of it, and we all know it is. But then they furnished the solution. Abraham Lincoln was talking about, no, we will not have a war with the South, when they had secretly loaded boats and ships and sent them down and was coming into Fort Sumter. And the militia in South Carolina told them, don't enter the harbor. Don't bring your armies and your military with you. They failed to listen. So the South fired on the northern ships and boats in Fort Sumter. So the war began. It was not over slavery, but that's what you'll be taught every single time. It was over states' rights. They had to create a problem, advertise it, and the final solution was to create an all-powerful central government in Washington, D.C. Newburyport, Massachusetts, was where the Illuminati was concentrated, their home base. They were the ones who were influencing the drive to infringe upon states' rights, all of our freedoms. Meanwhile, the Illuminati leaders, the international bankers, especially Mayor Amschel Rothschild's offspring, were trying to change the Constitution that said only Congress could coin money and set the value thereof. They wanted to have a national bank in which they would control it. They would be able to charge interest. No private individual or business was to ever have the privilege of money production for their own profit. But they got it 2 separate times, and they would loan money to the federal government. And then the federal government would have to pay it back in interest. In 1836, President Andrew Jackson had something quite startling to say. When the Second Bank of the United States charter expired in 1836, President Andrew Jackson would not renew it. He said, no, we're not going to have these bankers having the privilege of printing money and charging us, the federal government, interest. In 1833, President Andrew Jackson ordered all the money, which was quite considerable, of the federal government to be removed from the Central Bank of the United States, which was controlled by the Illuminati. It was to be transferred to various state banks. Nicholas Biddle, who was the head of the Central Bank for the Illuminati, was determined to undermine President Jackson by ordering a sharp reduction in loans throughout the banking system. What happened was that since he refused loans, there was a sharp contraction of money. Therefore, businesses could not operate. An economic panic took place. He purposely created a financial panic to blackmail the government in Washington, D.C. to recharter the bank. Andrew Jackson warned the American people, but it was short-lived. I'm quoting, "The bold effort the present bank has made to control the government, the distress it had wantonly produced, are but premonitions of the fate that awaits the American people should they be deluded into a perpetuation of this institution or the establishment of another like it." End of quote. He knew that a banking industry that produced money at interest, eventually the nation would go bankrupt. It would have to go into receivership into someone's hands. And so we can see there is now a slow progression of the Illuminati taking over the United States of America. It already had controls in Europe through all the banking houses there. They would create wars, one nation against another. If one nation tried not to pay back the money to the bankers, they would finance both sides of the war. And therefore, when the war was over, both would still have their land and their territory, their cities. It was called a balance of power. so they would keep one nation available to fight against another, just in case they began to catch on to their trickery. According to historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr., in his book, The Age of Jackson, page 6 and 7, President Jackson had told his Vice President, Martin Van Buren, "The bank, Mr. Van Buren, is trying to kill me." And it was trying to assassinate him, trying to remove him, so that he would no longer be an obstacle in their way of taking over the money system of America so they could control it. Because if they could get rid of the gold system, which was guaranteed in the Constitution, so many grams of silver or gold had to be in each coin. And then they fixed any paper currency upon the value of gold. And if they could only get rid of that standard, then they could print unlimited supplies of money. They could create inflation, deflation. They could create panics, total collapses of the economy if anybody stood up against them. They would control the destiny of every person in the country. In the middle of the war between the states, you notice I did not call it a civil war because it was not. It was a war between the states because of the reason for it. Violation of the 10th Amendment. The northern states, while President Abraham Lincoln was in office, passed the National Banking Act of 1863. I want you to hear in summary what this man, Abraham Lincoln, had to say concerning this National Banking Act. He said that there is a money power in America that's preying upon the nation. He said they're conspiring against the people in adverse times and then even in good times. He said that it is more dangerous than standing armies. He said that this money power being concentrated into the hands of a few people unnerves him and cause him to tremble for the future of his country. He said this money power, when they would aggregate all the money and the wealth into the hands of a few, the republic would be destroyed. What has happened in America today? Where is the money? You go into every little city in America and you have two things that is prominent: the bank and the mortuary. Every city. They're always beautiful, the most fantastic buildings in the county or in the city. In 1848, before the Civil War, a man by the name of Karl Marx came on the scene. He belonged to a branch of the Illuminati called the League of the Just. He was of no consequence. He couldn't even support his family. Several of his children died of malnutrition. He was under the complete control of an Englishman whose father ran the mills, the cotton mills and so on in England, while he went over into Germany. But the League of the Just selected Karl Marx to update Adam Weishaupt's plan for world government. His name was not even attached to it for 20 consecutive years until finally it was added and it became known as the Communist Manifesto. This was nothing more than a blueprint for world government and what the Illuminati was going to do, how they would overthrow country after country and establish their own socialistic, communistic government. The whole program was to create a communist man. They didn't believe in the Bible. They didn't know the only way to change human nature was the Holy Spirit of God. They believed the economic situation of all mankind determined the future, determined happiness. So if they could control everybody, and they could make everybody equal and nobody would have more than anyone else, they could create the communist man. During the war between the states, the Tsar of Russia sent a fleet of ships to help the South, to undo a blockade that the North had set up. And so the Illuminati never forgave the Tsar for those actions. They aided the opposition to their goal of creating a central government in Washington, D.C. And then a man by the name of V.I. Lenin came on the scene. He breathed life into the Communist Manifesto by adding force. Normal human beings, when they have enough food on their plate, would not become a communist. It's only when it's taken from your table, when your jobs are lost, when you are in a desperate situation, would you even listen to the tenets of international communism. So he attempted to overthrow the Tsar in 1905 to set up the sane government of the Western world of Christianity, create a crisis, atheism versus Christianity, then advertise it widely, then furnish the solution, and we'll see that solution from the pages of the Bible. He failed in his attempt, and he was exiled. His attempt was to establish the seen enemy of atheism against the Western world of Christianity. Lenin was fulfilling the communist program that had been laid down in 1829 by Francis Wright from England. And then Albert Pike, who laid down the program to the second person after Adam Weishaupt died. Giuseppe Mazzini took over the leadership of the Illuminati. He was from Italy. He was a revolutionary. He headed up the revolutionary arm of the Illuminati, while a man in the United States of America by the name of Albert Pike entombed 13 blocks from the White House. He was from Newburyport, Massachusetts, and when they were to infiltrate the South, he went to Arkansas. And he was the one that led the rebellion of Arkansas, the secession from the Union. He was the head of the secret society, the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, all over the world, the religious arm of it, while Giuseppe Mazzini headed up the revolutionary arm. So on August 15th, 1871, he laid down his pronouncements as to how they were to achieve world government by the close of the 20th century or early into the 21st century, by the dawning of the age of Aquarius. They went by the movement of the stars. So there was a very remarkable letter that was dated August 15th, 1871, that for many, many years was on display in the British Museum Library in London. It was removed when a Rothschild became one of the board of directors. Anyway, Albert Pike gave in great detail to Mazzini their Luciferian plan for world domination. They outlined many, many revolutionary wars under the name of communism. And then they said there would be 3 world wars. And in the 3rd World War, notice who it would be between. He said that we, meaning the Illuminati, shall unleash the nihilists, the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm with such great horror that it'll show to the nations the savagery of atheism. In other words, being guided without any principles, without any morals. And he said they would actually destroy atheism and communism in this war, and Christianity, because atheism would be pitted against Christianity. When this destruction of both Christianity and atheism came, there would be a great disillusionment in the Christian world. They would want to worship someone, but apparently their God was helpless. And so they would turn all of their adoration to the pure doctrine of Lucifer. Lucifer's name was changed to Satan. When you realize Revelation 13:2 tells us who this end-time world government receives its power from, It's the dragon, none other than Satan the devil. Albert Pike had already written to all the heads of all the lodges of Freemasonry all over the world. These are the 33rd degree, hand-selected to know the goals of world government. Those in the lower degrees know nothing about it. They're not told anything about the program. He wrote to them and said, Lucifer is God, and that we must maintain our belief in Lucifer, that he is the God of light and the God of good. So this is who is leading the way today, right now, for world government. The people that are behind world government are no more atheists than a donkey. They are very religious. They worship Lucifer with a passion. This is why they're achieving so much, because God has allowed it. God allowed it, nobody else. He's working out His program here below, and that program is going to culminate with the return of Jesus Christ to this world, to establish the kingdom of God and to save mankind from Lucifer and from himself. After the 1907 panic that was caused by the bankers in the United States, another man came on the scene that has slowly but surely influenced the movement of world government in the United States and the collapse of our states' rights and the promoting of an all-powerful central government in Washington, D.C. This was a mysterious Colonel Edward Mandell House, and he came from Austin, Texas. He was a front man for the international Illuminati bankers that were located in Europe, in England, and in New York City. He became the right-hand man of President Woodrow Wilson. President Wilson said that Mr. House was his second personality. Everything that he's recommended to me, I would have done it anyway. We think just alike. In the autumn of 1912, immediately after the presidential election, when Wilson was elected for the first term as a president, a book was published in the United States by the title Philip Drew, Administrator. Colonel House was the author, according to his autobiography. In this particular book, Colonel House outlined plans for a central bank. Remember, it had been rejected twice after 4 years of operation in America. But he said a central bank needed to be established. It was the very next year, the Federal Reserve System in 1913. Then he said that the income tax on individuals needed to be established. Now, both of these were planks of the Communist Manifesto found in the book with Karl Marx's name attached to it. He also said in the pages of that book, Philip Drew, Administrator, that socialism was to be America's government as dreamed of by Karl Marx. On the inside front cover was a quote from Giuseppe Mazzini, the head of the Illuminati from 1834 to 1872. So Colonel House was a direct agent of the Illuminati working for world government to bring socialism to America, to implement Satan, Lucifer's program of world government. So it's quite clear by now that the terms socialism and communism are the names that were to be used by the Illuminati in their main thrust toward world conquest. Just because they say communism has collapsed and they're moving to a market economy does not mean that that's true. I will state it from their own words in a moment, showing that they are trying to trick the West. For a couple of centuries prior to this particular time, the international bankers had reaped vast fortunes in Europe. They would finance the various nations and all of their wars with one another. History records that these nations were being plundered, they were being pillaged, they were being bled dry by war debts to the bankers. And in every single case, there was only one group that ever won in a war. Not a nation, but the bankers. They got richer and they gained more control every time. To be exact, Mayer Amschel Rothschild, who founded, basically, international communism through his secret organizations, said, "Give me control of the money and it doesn't matter who makes the laws." And that's true. It's been true in America ever since that. And with the advent of the Federal Reserve System and the income tax that came along about that same time in 1913, the way was now clear to siphon off the wealth of the American people, clean out the pocketbooks of the American people. The vast resources of America would now be manipulated and go into the hands of the very few. They would marshal all the wealth to themselves in their diabolical plan. And it didn't matter who made the laws because they controlled the wealth. They could bribe, they could pay off congressmen. That's why they got the 17th Amendment passed, so that the state Senate and representatives could not appoint a senator. They had to be elected by the people. And when there was a general election, they went to Washington, D.C., and they could be bribed. But when you were not elected by the people, you were appointed, you were held to an oath of office that if you did not do exactly what you were told and try to uphold the Constitution and prevent tyranny, you could be tried in a state court. Now this was gone. The people knew. People of the Illuminati knew that their time had come. Many patriotic Americans recognize the dangers that are inherent in the Federal Reserve System. There was a conservative by the name of Henry Cabot Lodge, Sr. Others of his family became agents of the Illuminati. But he wasn't. He said that if the bankers got hold of our money system, they would submerge the gold standard in a flood of irredeemable paper currency. And I challenge anyone, go to a Federal Reserve Bank with a Federal Reserve $100 bill, ask them for gold or for silver. They'll look at you, show you out the door. Their note means nothing, but when you look in laws on blacks, law books and other law books in America, you'll find that a note means you must pay someone upon demand. But the Federal Reserve does not have to pay anybody anything. It's nothing but a worthless, irredeemable piece of paper. It is only good if the people accept it. Charles Lindbergh Sr., who was the father of the famous aviator, stated, and I quote, "The invisible government by the money power will create inflation whenever the trust wants inflation." End of quote. So the only way that inflation can ever exist, ever, is when you overprint paper currency. There's only two organizations that can do that: the Federal Reserve System and the federal government of Washington, D.C. You don't cause inflation. Nobody else does. Only the overprinting of paper money and flooding the market with it. Then you have the same number of dollars chasing the same product. You have many, many times the number of dollars chasing the same product. And so inflation occurs. So when Greenspan or his soon successor comes along and says the economy is becoming overheated, we've got to raise interest rates, know that it's a bald-faced lie. The Federal Reserve loaned too much money to the government so they could go study the sex life of a gnat or something else, any excuse so that they can print more money. Then it becomes overinflated. They raise interest rates because who does the interest go to? The bankers. Simple when you understand it. And so the Federal Reserve System is the number one enemy of the people of the United States of America because they control the laws. They are the ones who are getting all of the legislation passed through their agents to control the guns also. World War I occurred just as Albert Pike said there would be 3 world wars. He said it on August 15th, 1871. Out of World War I, they tried to create world government. The world government organization called the League of Nations failed because the Senate of the United States rejected it. They knew that they were about to be sent into world government. We would lose our sovereignty. We would lose our ability to create and coin our own money. We would lose our national standing armies for our protection. So they vetoed it. Colonel House and others from the United States and Britain formed what is called the Council on Foreign Relations in the United States and the Royal Institute of International Affairs in England. These were to be the organizations through which they would now work in secret. This is part of their diabolical plan that Adam Weishaupt had come up with. And Mr. Devereaux said that the plan was so ingenious that the state and the church could not escape. Why? Because they would elect individuals to go to Washington to represent we the people, but they would be secret society members, secret Illuminati agents. They would be the ones to run for office. They would promote each other with money to guarantee that they would have the money to advertise themselves. And then they would pass legislation to destroy the republic. This is exactly what's been happening. Patriot 1 Act and now Patriot 2 Act, taking away all of our rights and infringing upon the 10th Amendment, the 9th Amendment, 8th Amendment, all of our constitutional rights. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a socialist. He was also a 32nd degree Mason. He was the man who was trained by a very suspicious man called Mr. Howe. For 5 years, Mr. Howe lived in his upper floors in their 2-story home. He became president of the United States, and he invited the Council on Foreign Relations members to take non-elected posts. They would become advisors. They would write legislation. And this is how they have infiltrated the government of the United States. And so, after only 20 years of the Federal Reserve System that was passed, December 23rd, when Congress was adjourned, except for a couple of senators that stayed there, and 2/3 of the senators there voted, 2 out of 3 voted, and the Federal Reserve became reality. The nation was now bankrupt. It was declared bankrupt. Notice what a man by the name of Louis McFadden, Congressman of the United States, said. There's a book that's out with all of his speeches called Collective Speeches. And on page 326, he says, every effort has been made by the Federal Reserve Board to conceal its power, but the truth is the Federal Reserve Board has usurped the government of the United States. It controls everything here, and it controls our foreign relations. It makes and breaks governments at will. End of quote. He was correct in his analysis. In 1917 to 1919, Something else was beginning to happen. But before I discuss that, I want to give you some information from a Representative Beck. In 1933, here's what he said concerning the Federal Reserve System and how that the Federal Reserve System had now caused America and Franklin Delano Roosevelt to declare the nation bankrupt. He said, how did it work? There were War Powers Acts that were issued in World War I that were never rescinded. And so the government used those War Power Acts. A part of the War Power Acts gave the president the right to declare emergencies. Under normal circumstances, he could not do that. Here's what Congressman Beck had to say. I think of all the damnable heresies that have been suggested in connection with the Constitution, it's the doctrine of emergency. It means that when Congress declares an emergency, there is no Constitution. This means it's death. But the Constitution of the United States, as a restraining influence in keeping the federal government within the carefully prescribed channels of power, is dying, if not dead. We're witnessing its death agonies. For when this bill becomes law, if unhappily it becomes law, and it did, there is no longer any workable Constitution to keep the Congress within the limits of its constitutional powers. Amazing. Now we understand why we have no Constitution to fall back upon anymore. Congressmen can pass laws that trample all over our God-given rights that are placed in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. It means nothing to them anymore because when we've been declared under a state of emergency since World War I, and it's never been lifted, so they can do anything they want to at any time, and they don't have to answer to we the people. However, there was another man by the name of James Traficant Jr. from Ohio. He was a representative. He was walking on the toes of those in power, and he was explaining to the American people what had happened to them. So they had to drum up some type of illegal charge to get him off the streets and shut his mouth. They did. He stated that the United States federal government has been dissolved by the Emergency Banking Act of March 9th, 1933. He went on to state where it could be found in the public laws, 89-719. He said that once we went off the gold standard and we were under this Emergency Act, that the sovereignty of the United States and the official capacities of all United States government offices, officers, and departments is further evidence that the United States federal government exists in name only. Name only. Yes, it's the power of the international bankers and the Federal Reserve and the Illuminati that now controls our government. They had decided that they were going to change our form of government from a Republican constitutional form to a democracy. You can look with a magnifying glass and you'll never find the word democracy anywhere in the Constitution. Yet all you hear on the nightly news is democracy, democracy, democracy. They are brainwashing the American people to forget the word Republican form of government. Because always the next stage from democracy, which means mobocracy. A Republican form of government gives you a set standard of laws that everybody must go by. But a democracy, just 40 or 50.1% of the people can vote, and then everybody comes under a law no matter how insane it is. And so our founding fathers said that a democracy was the most vile form of government ever imposed upon man. And within 50 years, it always goes to socialism, communism. Always. History bears it out. Well, that's exactly what they want. Meanwhile, back in 1917 to 19, V.I. Lenin, who had been expelled in 1905, deported out of Russia, was financed by American and British and European bankers to go into Russia, overthrow the Tsar. And then they would begin their wars of liberation once they controlled that government. They would support it. Western world would support international communism in secret. So V.I. Lenin laid down another part of the program that they would develop. He said, first we'll take Eastern Europe. So at the end of World War II, as the last 2 years when America would not go in and win the war, but they just lollygagged along, allowing Russia with American Lend-Lease materials to march across Eastern Europe and subjugate 11 countries. Over 100 million people went behind the Iron Curtain. Stage 1 of his 3-part program had been fulfilled. And then when Stalin of Russia, Roosevelt of the United States, and Churchill of England sat down and signed the final treaty, it gave those countries to Russia. Step 1, Eastern Europe taken. Then they said they would take the masses of Asia. So Chiang Kai-shek, our ally, trained in America, going to establish a constitutional republic for the Chinese people. All of his military was cut off, all of his parts, so that his planes, his guns, the ammunition was no longer supplied, so he couldn't defend the Chinese people. So Mao Zedong, supplied by Russia with American Lend-Lease war materials, took Communist China, the greatest catch of all. And then the domino theory began to take place. Nation after nation in Southeast Asia fell. To finally, plan 2 of Lenin of taking the masses of Asia was accomplished. Slowly but surely, world government is ascending out of the bottomless pit. Then Lenin's 3rd program was, we will surround the United States and it will fall. So they began to come into Central America, Nicaragua, San Salvador, Guatemala. Then they came into South America and Chile, Argentina, Venezuela, Colombia, to where they're nearly on the brink of every one of those nations collapsing. The entire educational system is controlled by communists in Mexico, and they have communist revolutionaries in the southern part of Mexico. And as they go, they kill all the Indian tribes and so on, preparing for the day when they'll come through the soft underbelly of the United States along the Mexican-American border. You wonder why all our troops are being sent out of the country to fight wars on terrorism? United Nations, UN programs in 100 countries to eliminate the military so that they cannot protect us from the soft underbelly infiltration and eventual movement into California, New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas if possible. The Illuminati fomented the Second World War, ended with the creation of a communist United Nations organization. Most people in America have never read the history of the founding of the United Nations. How that 43 members of the Council on Foreign Relations, founded by Colonel Marx or Colonel Edward Mandell House, saying that he wanted a Marxist socialist government from America. These people were trained and went out there to San Francisco and wrote the charter. Who was it? American Communist Alger Hiss, proven in a court of law that he was a communist. All 42 out of the 43 rather, were later found to be communists within 7 years after the charter was founded. Alger Hiss wrote it along with a communist from Russia. By agreement, the head of the United Nations military would always be a communist. No wonder we couldn't win the Vietnam War, the Korean War. We had to tell all of our plans to a communist. Then he would tell the communists in North Korea, South Korea, and then in Vietnam, where America was to strike next. Then in 1961, slowly but surely, they were taking over, helping to finance the overthrow on every continent in the world, even the African continent, for international communism. So world government, world dominance is slowly but surely creeping up, and Bible prophecy is happening. But it is so slow sometimes it nearly puts even the very elect asleep, waiting for it to happen. But we know that we're on the brink. It's just a matter of when God removes His angels that's holding it back, and suddenly it'll be an astonishment to the world. But John F. Kennedy became President of the United States, and most people don't realize that he was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Massachusetts Council. And so it was on September 1st, 1961, the United States government, with his signature, filed with the United Nations Organization, the Secretary General, a plan for the transfer of our military establishment to the United Nations Organization. This was public document coming from the State Department. It was to surrender our government. It was called State Department publication number 7277, entitled Freedom from War, the United States Program for General and Complete Disarmament in a Peaceful World. The goal is to place the defense of American citizens in the hands of the communist-dominated United Nations Security Council. The U.S. State Department, which is controlled by the Council on Foreign Relations, Joseph McCarthy had 81 names, but the gentleman who headed up security for the State Department ended up in court proceedings, found that there were over 800 individuals in the State Department that were either outright card-carrying communists or communist sympathizers or fellow travelers in our State Department. They were acting under the name of the American people, even though the American people knew nothing about it. They set forth the objectives of its programs for this general and complete disarmament in the world. That's why the United States of America feels secure in attacking other nations that have not attacked us. All nations have to be disarmed. But so does the American people. That's a part of the program. The Second Amendment has to be eliminated. That's why we had all the shootings and all the children that did all the shootings in the schools and killing teachers and other students were found to be on Ritalin. And Ritalin, some of the side effects are they want to murder people. They want to commit suicide. And when they take you off of it, the withdrawal pains, then you become violent. They knew it. And so they had to have a way to get the guns out of the people. So they passed laws to control guns and instant background checks. Then because of these instant background checks, you think you're going to have your gun standing right there in a matter of minutes. And sometimes it takes 5 to 6 weeks or even up to months to get your gun. You know what the FBI says? Fill out a report of complaint. Send it to us. There is no way for you to buy a new gun if they decide they don't want you to have one. So is the Second Amendment being taken away? You bet it is. Little by little, they're encroaching their world government to disarm the American people. There was a statement in a book. The book was entitled The Most Secret Science. It was written by retired Air Force Colonel Archibald Roberts. He said, and I quote, "Under this plan, the United States will finance and man a totalitarian United Nations military complex." End of quote. So the United States of America has been chosen to enforce disarmament of nations and, of course, of its own citizens as well. Former Congressman James B. Utt stated, "The so-called Disarmament Act sets up a super agency with greater power than the power of the Congress of the United States, which delegated the power. There is every intention on the part of this disarmament agency to destroy the sovereignty of this nation and put us under the control of international tyranny. And they're moving rapidly in this direction." End of quote. Just because Bible prophecy is moving slowly does not mean that it's not happening. But the Christian community at large becomes very, very upset because they don't see things happening so rapidly. When it really is, if you watch the news very, very carefully, things will come out that show step by step they're moving in that direction. Every president since Franklin Delano Roosevelt has been either a subversive Council on Foreign Relations member or a member of the secret Skull and Bones of Yale University, or an honorary 33rd degree Freemason. Yes, even Ronald Reagan was an honorary 33rd degree Freemason. President George W. Bush is a member of the Order of the Skull and Bones. His father before him, who was vice president 8 years and president for 4 years, was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, a member of the Trilateral Commission, a member of the Bohemian Grove, a member of Skull and Bones, and we've even published the membership list with his name on it, taken directly out of their files. Bill Clinton was a member of both the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission. No wonder, no matter whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, it does not matter. They're all members of the same organization. America thinks that they are going to make a change when they change parties in the White House. Then everything goes as planned. And the American people are once again disappointed. But they don't understand there is a secret agenda. And the secret agenda, according to David Rockefeller, cannot be given into the light of day because the American people would not accept giving up their constitutional rights. So they have to move very slowly so the American people will be put to sleep and not recognize that the water is boiling. The United States is now being used to disarm the nations. President Bill Clinton cut our military in half because he has to prepare for us to also be disarmed and turn what's left of the military over to the United Nations. President George W. Bush has already signed legislation starting in the year 2005 to once again cut our military bases. He sent our military, nearly all of it, to the Middle East. He's now called up the reserves. This will effectively leave the United States defenseless. And all of this when there has been Chinese Communist military seen by our INS Border Patrol coming into the deserts of Arizona. They've seen it and reported it, but did it make any difference? Not at all. They're sending the military overseas. Some of the proposed closings of bases for the year 2005, I'll only mention a couple of states where they're located. This is the Army. One in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Virginia, Puerto Rico, Georgia, New Jersey, Virginia, Fort Polk of Louisiana is to be realigned, not eliminated. one in Alaska, Texas, Hawaii, and the list could go on, another 8 or 10. Then the Air Force is going to shut down one in Oklahoma, California, Texas, New Mexico, Mississippi, South Dakota, Texas again, North Dakota, Massachusetts, New Mexico, California, Kansas. Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada is going to be realigned. And then also Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina is going to be realigned, not shut down. Then one in South Carolina and Oklahoma. This is going to be effective starting the year 2005. What in the world is happening to the United States? We're being led down the primrose path to destruction because of the sins of the nation. God doesn't change. Ancient Israel sinned. They went into national captivity. That's why I'm so thankful that we can believe every single word of God. Because He says some will still be faithful and He will hold out a protecting hand for those. But the rest will not be protected. They're going to go into national captivity. Notice a statement, another program that was laid down in the 1930s by the Illuminati, Dmitry Manuelitsky. He was the professor of the Lenin School of Political Warfare in Moscow. This will explain where we've been since about 1985 to 1989. Why Gorbachev came to America. He could have been elected president, and yet he was one time the head of the KGB. Then he was the head of all international communism, ruthless, murdered millions through his words. And they were carried out. Here's what he declared. War to the hilt between communism and capitalism is inevitable. Of course, in the 1930s, we're not strong enough to attack. Our time will come. To win, we shall need the element of surprise. We will have to put the Western world to sleep. What better way can you put someone to sleep than say communism has collapsed? It's dead. We're no longer your enemy. You can disarm now. You can declare your military to go home. You can re-educate them to enter into civilian society. You can send your military over to foreign countries to help implement disarmament. That's okay. But we're not your enemy anymore. Now, we used to be a superpower. We were your enemy. And that's the way they set it up. The seen enemy of atheism against the Western world of Christianity. Create the enemy. Advertise it. Oh, the world's going to end. We're going to blow each other up. Nuclear warfare. There's enough bombs to blow up 100 Earths like we have. And then the solution. The solution is we'll put you to sleep. We will pretend, feign weakness. Notice what they said in the 1930s, and they have never deviated from one statement they've ever made. There shall be electrifying overtures, unheard of concessions. Yes, the Berlin Wall came down. East and West Germany merged again. They said we're going to a market economy, not communist, socialist economy. Then they went on to say the capitalist countries, stupid and decadent, will rejoice to cooperate to their own destruction. They will leap at another chance to be friends. Yes, we sent all of our electronic industry over there to help them. We sent them to communist China. We send them everywhere into every communist country because it's just business. As V.I. Lenin said once about American capitalists, we'll give them enough rope and they'll hang themselves. The last statement of this back in the 1930s, as soon as their guard, yes, their military, is down, we shall smash them with our clenched fist. The clenched fist of communism. They've been building. We've been sending them financial aid, and they've been building and building and building. Militarily, in the mountains, they built secret cities to survive their wars. Yet the United States continues to disarm. But the Bible predicts this third and final war because the Western world of Christianity and atheism are to come against each other. It's to be in the last days, and out of the rubbles of this will come the New World Order. Notice what it says in Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 1 to 12. I may summarize parts of it. The word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set your face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech, that's Moscow, and Tubal, Tubalsky, the two modern-day Asiatic and European capitals of communism, and prophesy against him. And so he says, I'm against you in verse 2. Verse 3 says the same thing. And verse 4 says that he's going to put hooks into their jaws because they're so slow in moving and carrying out all their programs. They're just so slow that God is finally going to say, I'm going to put hooks in your jaws and I'm going to declare time is up. You're going to make your move. And so I will jerk you and force you to go into a certain location. In verse 4, the latter part said, you come with all of your horsemen, and with you you're going to have a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. In other words, modern military equipment. Persia, that's Iran, Iraq, basically the Middle East, the Arab countries. Ethiopia, which is communist, and Libya, which is controlled by Muammar Gaddafi. All of them with shield and helmet. So something is going to change the people's minds, and they will join with Russia. They've been supplied all of these years by Russian military, Russian financing, Russian advisors. He says, Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters. So the satellite countries that they keep saying are now independent federation states, they're all communist to the core, controlled by former Central Committee members of the Communist Party or the KGB, every single one of them. And many people with you. And what does he say? Look, you be prepared. You get your military ready for you, and you arm everybody else. And all your company that are assembled with you, and be you a guard to them. Don't you let one of them leave international communism. You pretend that you've fallen and collapsed. Oh yeah, that's okay. Until the West disarms. They can't defend themselves. Verse 8, after many days you shall be visited. In the latter years you shall come into the land that is brought back from the sword. Yes, ancient, the northern 10 tribes of Israel went into national captivity, 721 to 718 BC. They were sifted across the nations. They landed in Western Europe, Great Britain. And when the time came, one of the two brothers of Joseph, Manasseh, sprung forth and came to this continent, and they're living here. And is gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel. Not Judah. Judah is contraction Jews. No, this is the northern 10 tribes, which have been always waste. We brought ourselves into this continent that had no roads, had no dams, no electricity, none of those things, and we have built it into the greatest nation that has ever existed. But it is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. We've never had a foreign military except one time with Mexico, even coming close to a border of the United States. But he says, Russia, you're going to come like a storm. Yes, you'll be like a cloud to cover the land. All your bands and many people with you. They're going to think that they're going to come and they're going to pillage, they're going to take, they're going to rape the land of all of the natural resources that we have. But God, when you read the rest of the chapter, is going to intervene, because both atheism and Christianity, both are going to be destroyed. But what could get the attention of someone if they're maybe declaring war in the Middle East? Notice in Daniel chapter 11, verse 40 to 45. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him. So this is an Arab going to push at the old Roman Empire, which Europe is a part of, and the United States is a part of NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So the United States went into the Middle East because of their excuse, threat of terrorism. And the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, and chariots, horsemen, and many ships. And he shall enter into the country, shall overflow and pass over. He shall enter also into the glorious land. Yes, that's Palestine, Jerusalem. And many countries shall be overthrown. These shall escape out of his hand, even Edom, yes, Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. That's Jordan. Why? Because these countries, like Turkey, are allies with America. Jordan is an ally. They're not a part of the radicals. They're not a part of Iran, Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Yemen. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape, because some of the top people in Al-Qaeda are a part of Egypt. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold, silver, everything in the Middle East. That's precious black oil. And the Libyans and Ethiopians shall be at his steps. Both of those are either communist Ethiopia or a very staunch ally. But tidings out of the east. What is straight east of Palestine? Communist China. And out of the north. What's straight north of Jerusalem? Moscow. Communist Russia shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. When he comes to his end, does that mean that both atheism and Christianity is going to be destroyed? He'll have no more military to fight? Does it mean that now the Third World War that Albert Pike said will be over? Does the Bible show exactly what's going to happen? And if we don't think a former KGB agent by the name of Vladimir Putin, who heads Russia, if we have doubts about him securing himself and remaining in charge of Russia, you can let all your doubts go away. The Financial Times of London in the United States edition states that Russian election boosts Putin. It puts him into a dictatorship. He is calling all the shots in Russia today. He will not deviate from the plan. Their plan is to surround the United States, and it'll collapse. They're going to use the soft underbelly of the United States against us. Then there is coming the factor of who's going to be in control after this great war destroys both atheism and Christianity. In the middle 1970s, barcodes began to appear on all the products being sold across America. Then they went around the world. And in the very description of these barcodes, it said that it was for buying and selling. It was to mark the products so that they could be bought and sold. Inventory. You know, it's very interesting. We published many magazines back in the early 1980s. We showed the barcodes on human foreheads. We even showed the socialist NEA journal, Senior Scholastics, that went out to all the high schools in America with barcodes on the heads of the students. And this was to be in the future. Everyone would be marked for buying and selling in the new economic situation that the world would find itself. But then there's other technology that has been on the drawing board now for some time. It's to begin in the year 2005. Walmart, which just happens to be the second largest corporation on earth, is leading the push for what they call radio frequency identification. It's to go on every product. Little radio waves go out and they're read by the scanners. Here it is out of the Dallas Morning News. And anybody that won't go along with it, Walmart says, will be left behind and be out of the system. It's very interesting to me what it says in Revelation 13, verse 16 and 17, because when this end-time dictatorship comes on the scene, as Albert Pike said, who was a direct agent of Lucifer, he said after the Third World War, that's when the whole world would accept Lucifer and the pure doctrines of Lucifer as God. But in Revelation 13, 16, and 17, this person that comes on the scene as a religious individual will work miracles before the world dictator. And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in the right hand or in their foreheads, that no man might buy or sell. So it has to do with business. Whether you buy groceries, whether you buy food products for your children, for your home, an automobile for transportation to go to your jobs, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. So everybody's going to be in the same situation, no matter who it is. There's only going to be one group of people that will be outside of the system. Those are the ones that have so lived their life right now properly before God. And when they saw they were wrong, they would lay down pride and admit, I was wrong. The Bible's right. I'm the one that's got to be wrong. I will go according to what the Bible says. They are the ones that are going to be protected. And Christians who will not lay down their pride, but will hold on to their errors, will go through this great tribulation time. They will either take the mark to buy or sell, or they will be martyred. This will be the way that they're going to separate those of God from those who are not. Those on God's side and Jesus Christ are Lucifer's side. And so the time will come when there will be a separation. But in Revelation 13 also, in verse 3, because there were these 7 heads, 7 governments that would rise from Nimrod's day, the original Babylon, right on up through the Roman Empire. Then its continuous revival. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death. And his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. So after this great war occurs between communism and Christianity, on the heels of it, there is going to rise this end-time final system. Daniel 7 says that it'll come out of Europe. It'll come out of Rome, the 4th one. That does not mean it's going to be 10 little nations in Europe. It does not mean that. The whole world, it says all the world will wonder after the beast. And then even in verse 7, it says all kindreds and tongues and nations will come under the power of this organization, governmental organization. But notice what it does say in Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2, back where we started the message, verse 41 and 42. And whereas you saw the feet and the toes, there are 10 toes. And it would be part of potter's clay, part of iron. And you look at conferences that are held around the world. You have the G7 and now G8 countries. Those are the ones with solid economic and their country. The countries that are not third and fourth world. The United States, Canada, Great Britain, Germany, and so on, Japan. The economic giants of the world, they're going to be part of iron. The rest are going to be miry clay, you might say. Verse 42, and as the toes of the feet were part of iron, part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. So there were 10 toes. But what does this have to do? Is this 10 kings? Is it? We'll see. Look at what it says in verse 44 and 45. Same chapter. And in the days of these kings, and it was just talking about the toes. These is plural. Not just the one person that the Christian community calls the Antichrist, but there will be 10 kings. In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom. Way back in 1976, the Club of Rome, a think tank for one-worlders, laid out the world. We published it on the front cover of some of our magazines back in the 1970s, or 1980s, I'm sorry, showing the world divided up into 10 global kingdoms. 10, the whole world. Just like it said, they would bear rule over all peoples, languages. And so the 10 kings, or the 10 toes, represent the world divided into 10 global groupings of nations. And in the days of these plural kings, that's when this final end time system is going to be established. Once again, Revelation chapter 13, verse 1. And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns. Who wears crowns? Kings do. Or if there is no male, a queen, like Queen Elizabeth. But it will be 10. There will be a world government with 10 individual groupings of nations according to their economic situation. Each one will be ruled over by a king. And then all of them will give their power unto one individual who will be over the 10. Does the Bible say that? You bet it does. Notice what it says in Revelation 17. Revelation 17, remember those horns that were wearing 10 crowns. Verse 12 to 14. And the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings. It says it specifically. Which have received no kingdom as yet. Why? They're waiting for the right and precise time in history. But receive power as kings 1 hour with a beast. Here he is, the world dictator, and 10 kings ruling over the 10 divided kingdoms of the world. These, that's plural, have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. He's the world dictator. The false prophet is going to do miracles in front of this great world dictator, and all the nations of the world are going to fall for him. They'll worship him as if he were God. These, notice, the 10 kings, along with this one world dictator, shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. For he's Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. So here we see something very exciting. These 10 kings that are ruled over by this one person claiming to be God, but he's inspired by Lucifer, Satan the devil, will be in full swing. They will rule all powerfully. But then Jesus Christ, when the 7th trump sounds, all people who have the Holy Spirit or had it before they died and are in the grave, as King David said, or Acts chapter 2 says, David is both dead and buried, his sepulchre is with us. David has not ascended into the heavens. All that are in their graves are going to come out of their graves with a new body. And those of us who are standing alive will come out of this body with a new glorified body. And we will meet Jesus Christ in the air. We will be at the marriage supper of the Lamb in chapter 19 of Revelation, verse 7 to 10. And we will receive our rulership position. That's who God's calling today. Rulers, kings, priests, Revelation 5, verse 9 and 10 says so. Revelation 20, verse 4 and verse 6 says so. And when you read to the 7 churches in Revelation 2 and 3, he reiterates it. They're going to rule. This is our job. This is why we're training in the laws of God today, so that we can administer the laws. But Jesus Christ is going to overthrow this system. And then there are individuals with them that were first called. Then they were chosen because they repented and started obeying God. Then they were faithful in that obedience to the very 7th trump or their death, whichever occurred first. But notice now in Revelation 19, verse 11 to 16. Here's Jesus returning. And I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True. And in righteousness he does judge and make war. His eyes were as a flame of fire. On his head were many crowns, showing the various offices of Jesus, high priest, King of kings, Lord of lords. And he had a name written that no man knew but he himself, and he was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood, yes, the shed blood for the sins of the world. And his name is called the Word of God, John 1, verse 1 to 3. And verse 14 identifies it as Jesus Christ. And the armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean. That's the saints, because verse 7 to 10 says that the saints will be dressed in clothing of fine linen, white and clean, and that represents the righteousness of the saints. Out of his mouth, verse 15, goes a sharp sword, that with it he should smite the nations. He shall rule them with a rod of iron, and he treads the winepress of the fierceness of the wrath of Almighty God. And he has on his vesture and on his thigh a name written, King of kings and Lord of lords. He's going to be all powerful, but he's King of kings. You and others like us from righteous Abel are the other kings. He is the great super Lord of the world. But you and everybody that's had God's Holy Spirit, that have been called, chosen, and remain faithful unto their death as the apostles did, or us who will be facing either death or the change instantly in the twinkling of an eye. We will be there if we've remained faithful. Notice verse 19 to 21. I saw the beast and the kings, plural, those 10 of the earth, and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse and against his army. And the beast was taken. That's the great dictator over the world that claims to be God, sitting in the temple of God. And with him the false prophet that worked miracles before him, which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast and them that had worshipped the beast. These both were cast alive into a lake of fire burning with brimstone. And the remnant were slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse, which sword proceeded out of his mouth. That's figurative language. And all the fowls were filled with their flesh. The victory, in spite of this slow rising conspiracy for world government by Satan and his agents, human agents, they think they're doing a God a service. They think when you are found, and if you're not in this place in the wilderness called safety, with divine protection and they put an individual Christian to death, they will think they're doing God a service. John 16, 1-2 says so. But it will be the wrong God. It'll be Lucifer, Satan. They will honestly believe they're doing him a service by ridding the heretics out of the earth, when in reality, they are in the wrong. The victory will be in Jesus Christ. It'll be His. The victory will be for the called, the chosen, and the faithful. Brethren, I want you to never, ever, ever forget the concluding statement that I'm going to make today. This concluding statement is so powerful if you listen to it, if you understand it from the depths of your being, and that if you will act upon the Word of God in your personal life, this is your scripture. Just those who have the Holy Spirit, who are to become kings and priests, to judge the nations under Jesus Christ. Luke chapter 12, verse 29 to verse 32. And seek not you what you shall eat and what you shall drink, neither be you doubtful of mind. For all these things do the nations of the world seek after, and your Father knows that you have need of these things. But seek rather you the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added unto you. In other words, you don't have to worry. You'll be taken care of while you're in the flesh right now. No matter what circumstances may seem to come across your path, God knows that we have to eat, keep ourselves clean, live out of the elements. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Brethren, will you accept it?